Welcome back. This is Daybreak, and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Your contributions will be, of course, later on sampled in the course of this broadcast. And this morning we'll be taking a look at a report which was issued by the Missing Voices and documented 113 cases of police killings in Kenya, cases of enforced disappearances, and also a report which was yesterday corroborated by Amnesty International, which issued also its update with regards to the killings across the country. We'll be taking a look at the details of these reports and also with regards to the partnership that was provided by the International Commission of Jurists, Kenya section, the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, and the Kenya Human Rights Commission, Amnesty International, Haki Africa, Muhuri, which is Muslims for Human Rights, the Defenders Coalition, the Justice, Truth and Dignity, and also Human Rights Watch, that will be taking a look at this morning here on the broadcast. On my far right is Commissioner John Waiganjo. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
Thank you. With the Independent Policing and Oversight Authority, IPOA. Andrew Camillo on my immediate right is an advocate. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Commentator on social and economic political affairs. At the center is Wanjiru Wanjira. She is the co-founder, Mathare Social Justice Center. Good morning. Lovely to have you here. Shukri Wachu is seasoned journalist who has also reported extensively on cases of extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances. He is the current liaison officer between the ICJ Kenya and Missing Voices Initiative. Lady and gentlemen, your time is all appreciated. What a time to have this discussion that is so timely and appears to be the common denominator in all aspects if you look at it with regards to how we are facing this very problematic issue. First, I begin with you, Wanjiru Wanjira, and looking through the report, it's more or less a focus on the informal sectors, more or less, and the informal settlements. And many of these victims are people from such setups, socio-economically disadvantaged, and somewhat who have fallen victims of police killings. We'll be detailing the numbers herein. But is it surprising that we still seem unable to substantively address this problem of extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances? Nearly 14 years since we promulgated the Constitution 2010.
Thank you so much again for having me this morning. I think the history of extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances have been there in our country for a while. If we remember the case of J.M. Kariuki, who disappeared after being very vocal about the growing and unequal distribution of social wealth in the country. Kenya being a country of 10 millionaires and 10 million beggars, which is a reality we are now dealing with very much as a country. We can see the glaring disparities between the haves and the have-nots, which is also very evident in how the law is applied. We can see how people, the have-nots, have been victims of unlawful distribution and unequal distribution of the law. So I think that is the genesis of where all of this is coming from and why many people from the informal settlements are victims of enforced disappearance, victims of extrajudicial killings, victims of unequal distribution of the law. And also there's a failure of judiciary to realize justice for these victims, because if you look at the history of following up cases in court, it's always been a very slow-paced journey. And just the general lack of accountability for police.
Yeah.
Only recently did we see Ahmed Rashid in court, and I want to thank IPOA for ensuring that that actually happened, because we were really pushing since 2017, that at least we get accountability, that at least we get to uphold the rule of law in informal settlements, which has been missing. Yeah. For the longest time, yeah. And
his case is here detailed in the report. We'll be taking a look at that, and also the infographic provided of Police Sergeant Ahmed Rashid captured allegedly shooting two young men, Jamal Mohammed and Mohammed Dahir Khairi, in front of a crowd at Amal Plaza in Eastleigh, Nairobi in 2017. The timeline provided and why it took so long will be the subject of our discussion. But Commissioner, coming to you, the chairperson of the commission also is captured here in the report by Missing Voices, and here she details the convictions that you have attained from courts of law, of course subject to the determination by the courts depending on the threshold of evidence. And between January 2023 and March this year 2024, all your investigations, Commissioner, have led to at least 14 convictions. And she cites the case of the former officer Ahmed Golicha, who shot 2 people, killing one in Meta Market in Mandera County in October 1st, 2017. But many Kenyans will look at you as an organization with legislative powers created and informed by our dark past when you look at what happened in 2007 in the aftermath of the post-election violence, where 1 in 3 of the more than 1,000 Kenyans who were killed was as a result of police bullet. They will look at you in the eye and say the avalanche of cases filed before you is not commensurate with the convictions from the courts of law. Where is the problem? Is the problem your investigation? Is the problem resourcing? What can you point as the major challenge as to why you are unable to achieve more convictions from the courts of law?
Thank you. I think I want to open this discussion further and not confine it to the police officers. Because when we talk about extrajudicial killing and enforced disappearance, there is a notion that that is only done by police officers.
Yeah.
We receive a lot of complaints. We've received over 30,000 complaints. And if you look at our data, you will see that only 9,000 of those cases have made it to investigations. Because part of what we receive as complaints, we do preliminary investigations and find out that actually the culprits or the perpetrators of some of those extrajudicial killings are not even police officers. And I want to say here that in a country where we have a rising economic crimes and corruption, there are people who just put in the police uniform, do an abduction, and somebody disappears. When we receive such a complaint and the body is not even found, our investigations then start at a preliminary level. So if we find that we do not have sufficient evidence to charge a police officer, we don't charge. And we don't recommend charges to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, because we also understand police officers as Kenyan citizens and career officers who are also deserving of due diligence. So sometimes we are not the head. Once we do the investigations, we have to forward the files to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, who determines whether there is culpability on the officer that we take to the Director of Public Prosecution. But I want to say that there are many, many cases, particularly of enforced disappearance, where we are unable to get headway, because once we carry out our investigations, we find that there are people who probably show themselves out as officers, but when we trace back our investigations to jurisdictions within those areas, you find that those officers are not even known. The other thing I want to say is that we have a challenge, because in this country, we do not have a law specifically for enforced disappearance. And that becomes a very big problem. Because if you think about it, what is enforced disappearance even? Because if you juxtapose it with abduction, for instance, if you take an officer to court, or anybody for that matter, and charge them with abduction, and the body is not found, it's a very difficult case to prove. If the body is found, then therefore, it becomes murder. And therefore, if you are to charge, then you charge with murder. But if you charge extrajudicial killing, or if you charge with enforced disappearance, we do not have that in our penal code. So it's not just IPOA. It is also our registrators, because we need standalone registration, and we need also an amendment to the penal code where we will have an offense of enforced disappearance, so that we know what it is. And even extrajudicial killing, because when we say extrajudicial killing, what are we talking about? Are we talking about state-sponsored killing? Or are we talking about convictions in our law courts, so that now we call that a convict? Or are we saying then extrajudicial killing can also be made by the members of the public, or ordinary criminals? So there are cases we will receive Then once we do our preliminary investigations, we find that the officers who are alleged to have committed those offenses are not connected with the crime. And when that happens, we just forward the file to the Director of Criminal Investigations because our mandate is principally on the members of the National Police Service.
And therefore, this comes down to the aspect of policy.
Exactly.
And when we talk about policy, then, the president, I mean, it's all about leadership, and leadership starts from the top. The president is the commander-in-chief, and he talked about this matter very extensively when he campaigned, expressing his concern about Kenyans who were abducted and killed, also foreigners. The case of the 2 Indian nationals whose bodies were found in Aberdare Forest. Now, coming back to the question when he said, or what informed the government's disbanding of the SSU, and currently there's, of course, an ongoing court case as to their involvement. But then, does it not concern you as an agency that looks into excesses of police killings, extrajudicial killings, not only necessarily within the confines of police, but also other abductions, that whilst the top leadership is expressing itself on this matter, then it's not coming down to the policy question of this being taken to Parliament and fast-track, therefore, these laws that where you're saying there are gaps can sufficiently be addressed?
The issue is he even spoke about it after campaigns. He spoke about it when he became president. He formed a liaison committee where constitutional commissions and independent offices were granted an audience with him, and IPOA included. And the starting out issue was that why are we unable to loop in members of the service who are suspected of police killings. But the thing is, we do not have, even at the policy level, I don't see any difficulty, depending on the state acceptance of independent officers. Because I can tell you for a fact, we haven't had any difficulties in our funding, nor have we had any difficulties on impediments on our work on policy issues. But I also want to say that even when the president expresses himself, I do not think now he takes the matter up to Parliament. I think Parliament has legislators who themselves or by themselves should be able to push through legislation that gives birth or gives laws that we are able to follow. I know that the Attorney General, for instance, committed Kenya to the International Convention of Enforced Disappearance. And that is pending ratification. So what we're pushing for is also that ratification, because the impact and the effect of such ratification will therefore domesticate and give us even a perspective on whether that can be a law that we can use even without our domestic registration. So therefore, I mean, on the issue of policy, I don't see the failure on the state actors. I see the failure on the registrators themselves.
But you appreciate that we live in a country where legislators can't do anything that's not sanctioned by the top.
But Abdikadir, let me ask you. I mean, if you choose as an individual not to start firm and push legislation, you cannot blame the state. I mean, you cannot say that because you belong to a particular political party, when you are in a presidential system and you have a voice of your own and you can push legislation as you can, and then you blame the state because you are coerced, either coerced or whatever. I mean, I think that's the long notion to take. I think what we should do, officers in this country, elected, appointed, or people who are working in the public space, should be able to stand on their own and not to pass the buck, because that's where the problem begins. And
then the problem is that, and we all appreciate this is the logical fact, Commissioner, is whilst that is the realist position, the at the moment position is that members of Parliament largely only support issues that are sanctioned from the top. And we have seen them go to State House, being told the position of the government, push this agenda in Parliament. And this is a live issue that if addressed sufficiently, agencies like you will have proper working timeframes to deliver, I mean, such cases to court.
I hear you, but I also want to put you, I mean, to read you to the judiciary as well. Because, for instance, we are talking about extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearance. We forget that we have a judiciary that is dispensing boards and bails without looking closely at the people who are appearing before our courts. And we have seen instances where a person has been charged with a criminal offense or an economic crime. And then a board is issued after that person is bailed or boarded, which is a constitutional provision, operative. Yes. But once they go out there, we hear the witnesses have disappeared, and that person also skips bail and probably even comes back to court. Even if cash bail was forfeited, it's just cash. So they'll come back to court, their bail will be reinstated, but then their matter will collapse. So is it very difficult to know how that witness disappeared? Okay,
we'll talk more about that, because also the question of resourcing is what the chairperson, IPOA, also talked about in this interview captured, Anne Makori, and we'll be talking more about that. Shukri, coming to you, you have covered extensively in the course of your journalism career, and now as the link between ICJ Kenya and the Missing Voices Initiative. 113 2023, 111 2022. 2 lives, but too many, is it?
I think, Ayub, you mentioned earlier that Kenya really has a dark history when it comes to policing and its relationship with the citizenry. And during its various iterations, pre-independence, when Kenya, the police was still being referred to as a police force, we saw the changes that were brought forth by the Constitution 2010 when it became a service, hoping that it would improve the relationship between police and citizenry. However, we continue to see that the relationship between the two entities is still contentious. Yeah. And you mentioned the onus and the responsibility that is on the state. Before the launch of this report, we saw earlier this year a very senior government official saying that police brutality and excessive force does not exist in the country. That's actually a travesty and a mockery of people that are fighting against police brutality, victims, to human rights defenders and organizations. I think the numbers are very clear. And when you look at, albeit in this particular report that is under the theme of End Police Impunity, you will hear that there was at least a 9.2% drop in the cases of police brutality and cases of killings and extrajudicial enforced disappearances. But what the numbers do not say is that there's also a change of tact in terms of how the police officers operate. Because in studies that are currently ongoing, there are cases whereby you'll see that mobs are actually being used to kill people. So when it comes to monitoring and reporting these cases, it becomes very difficult, because when the cases are reported, you will hear that this was a case of mob injustice that was committed by particular people. But even the targeting of the marginalized communities and people across our country, it's really a huge concern, because you'll start to notice that the youth are actually being targeted, students are being targeted, people working in the informal sector, particularly in the border in the matatu industry. Okay. So these are concerns that are really, that continue to plague the sector. And I think that it will be a mistake and a mockery to say that police brutality does not really occur in this country.
And who is that leader who said it doesn't exist?
The Prime Cabinet Secretary, actually, when he was in, I think he was attending the African Union Executive Council on Foreign Affairs Ministers. That is a proclamation he made earlier this year. Okay. And it's actually a mockery to what we are trying to, to talk about.
We'll have time to expound on those issues, because I also need to come back to you and Commissioner Waiganjo. But Advocate Andrew Kameli, the basis of this architecture of our governance is rule of law, constitutionalism, and good governance. And when we talk about Kenyans who are killed, Kenyans who are abducted, some ending up being never found, some coming back with trauma, unable to tell their stories, and then in the context of our governance architecture, do they match?
Well, first and foremost, Ayub, just briefly, let me begin by sharing in the grief of the millions of Kenya who are currently feeling the weight of floods all over. So that then they should know that we are together in this. But besides that, going to your question, you know, it's very important that we establish that an amendment in the law or a modification of the law only happens when, or most of the time happens when a lacuna or a mischief has been established. So therefore, then we modify the law to answer or to remedy that challenge. And that is to appreciate that at the very onset, we understand where the country comes from. We have had our colleagues mention the dark past with police brutality. And therefore, these are some of the things that even informed the coming up with the Constitution of Kenya 2010 and the IPOA, establishing of the authorities like the IPOA, so that then they'll be able to deal with these issues. So then look at it that where are we coming from vis-a-vis where we are and where we are going. I've also attempted to look at the report that has been highlighted by Shukri.
Yeah.
You'll see that there is a drop accordingly, up to 9-point-something%. However, he says that there is also the aspect of change of tact and things like that. But I want us to look at where we are coming from and where we are and where we are going. We are coming from a dark past where people would just get lost, abducted, others would die, and nobody would do something about it. There would be no accountability. Where are we right now? We are in a situation where we have the Constitution of Kenya 2010 and several acts of parliament that then enforce what is provided for in the Constitution. And we are also in a dispensation where the political wing, that is the government that runs this country, has severally expressed themselves on this question of extrajudicial killings. And where are we going? Where we're going is to encourage that most of the institutions that are involved are taking part and are accountable. Are we putting the IPOA to the level where they're accountable to us? Are we talking to the judiciary, or are we putting pressure on the judiciary to ensure that most of these cases that go before them are heard and dealt with expeditiously? Are we dealing with even institutions like the one that my sister here works for, the human rights? Are they being given a chance to help advance these cases? So for me, I would not want to be pessimistic, to look at it as though we are in a very bad spot. So far, so good, and I think going forward, we just need to enhance, amend the law where necessary, look at some of the areas where we have the gaps and deal with them accordingly. But going forward, our architecture, as designed by the 2010 Constitution, provides for the several aspects of how to deal with these matters. We are talking about the judiciary. The judiciary is there. We have been able to attain a number of convictions. That is proof enough that the judiciary, to an extent so far, has been able to deliver on their mandate. Whether they are not doing it to the level that is expected, that is another thing altogether. Okay. We are talking about the question of the executive, and if they have been able, the executive and the legislature, if they've been able to help and deal with the particular areas like the IPOA questioning, asking for funding and things like that. The commissioner has confirmed that they have not been able to experience any impediments on executing their mandate, because the government has been, or the parliament and the executive have been able to fund them accordingly. Okay. So for me, if we look at such particular aspects, we'll be able to understand whether are we moving in the right trajectory or not. Okay, in regards to the the hope that you have expressed, 113 is a big number of people who have been felled by police bullet. We'll extend on that, and when we get back from the break, also move ahead with this discussion as how to address the socio-economic aspect and the idle minds of young Kenyans. If you look at the age bracket of the people who are felling victims, these are young Kenyans who probably, if otherwise, there are other underlying problems that dot their lives are addressed sufficiently, which comes to the policy position that we talked about, then that makes up a society where we all are equal, and such cases could and possibly could be lessened. You're watching Daybreak. Many thanks for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. We proceed with the discussion after the break here on the broadcast. Stay tuned.